Pricilla got to messing around with an older crowd. Unlike the fictionalized version of her life that Pricilla would later create, Paul Beaulieu was not a caricature of the strict military father, nor were her parents overprotective. The rules and regulations at her home were fairly lenient for Air Force parents. Pricilla had a goal that summer of 1959 to meet Elvis Presley in Germany, and once Priscilla Beaulieu had set a goal, nothing would stand in her way. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer, so happy to have you back for Chapter 7 of Child Bride, the untold story of Pricilla Beaulieu Presley by Suzanne Finstad. Chapter 7 is called Sexpot. I want to get into it because the book is getting really good. If you're new to this series, you can definitely jump in here, not a problem. But if you want to get to the heart and to the root of this story, who Pricilla Presley is from the very beginning, you got to get back to Chapter 1. Now, in the last episode, Chapter 6, it was called Secrets Revealed. We talked about the devastating story of when Priscilla finally discovered the origin story of her birth, who her real father was. That was a secret that was kept from her by her mother and her stepfather, Paul Beaulieu. And I go into my feelings on that, why I think that that is such a devastating psychological blow to a child, not something that she should have gone through, all the circumstances surrounding that. But she had just found out in that chapter that her stepfather was not her real father. And it had a devastating effect on Priscilla, as we will see going into this chapter. So this is Chapter 7, Sexpot. Priscilla nearly collapsed under the strain of her sacred pact of silence with her mother. Anne Beaulieu had placed an enormous burden on a 13-year-old child by asking her daughter to keep her paternity a secret, even from her siblings and from the man she now knew was not her real father. Now, just really quickly, Anne Beaulieu had committed to Priscilla this contract. Please do not talk about this with your stepfather. It would be devastating to him. Let's keep this a secret just between you and I. So going forward, Priscilla had this enormous burden on her not to discuss her real father with anyone in the family. So that's what the author's talking about when she's saying this enormous burden that's placed on a 13-year-old Priscilla. She assumed the responsibility with great seriousness. As she later explained, if someone had entrusted me with something, I could never betray them. She told no one about the discovery of her true identity, not even Pam. Pam is her childhood best friend while she's still living in Austin, Texas. As time passed, she became conflicted about wearing the locket containing the picture of her real father, because it's like I was hiding something from him. And what I mean, you see what I mean? These secrets and these lies and these deceptions, they're not good. The trauma of her mother's betrayal and her own suppression of the truth affected Priscilla's behavior. Her grades dropped, and it was a big blow to her, recalled her friend Carol Ann. Pam Rutherford moved to England just after school began, leaving Priscilla without, as she later wrote, Pam, her first real friend. Friends and neighbors, including Charlie Clements, noticed a sudden shift in Priscilla's behavior. She went through a real change of personality, reflected Carol Ann. Her friends had no idea what was going on with Priscilla. Paul began doing extracurricular work for the CIA that year. He would tell Priscilla of his covert work, but caution her not to say anything to anyone else. It was business as usual for the Beaulieu household. Priscilla, instead of confronting, simply shut down. It was not only the Iverson Beaulieu way, it was the military way. A good military family, Mary Edwards Wurst explained, displays to the world what ought to be displayed and conceals the rest. I think this Mary Edwards Wurst, if I recall correctly from an earlier chapter, she wrote a book about the dynamics of military family life. So she's the one saying that, the good military family has to have everything on the up and up, this facade presented to the outside world. So she's saying that that's just kind of par for the course. And that is the way that the Beaulieus conducted business at home. Mike Edwards, Priscilla's adult beau, considered Priscilla's childhood oppressed and believed that Paul Beaulieu was an alcoholic, the secret problem of many military families. None of her childhood friends had a clear sense of Paul or of Priscilla's relationship with him. I couldn't get a fix on it, Carol Ann admitted. With Pam's parents, it was a real comfortable setting. It wasn't the same at Priscilla's. Priscilla's twin sources of salvation were her fantasy father, Jimmy Wagner, and her fantasy lover, Elvis Presley. She was unaware that destiny was about to intervene. The first development was Elvis Presley's draft notice, early in 1957. The second was Gladys Presley's death on August 14th, 1958. Elvis's mother died just weeks after Priscilla's real father was reborn through her discovery of the hidden trunk in the closet. And isn't that apropos when you think about it? When people talk about skeletons in the closet, I mean, quite literally, there was a trunk in Priscilla's mother's closet that had all of the information, everything that Priscilla had been seeking her entire childhood about who she really was and where she came from in that trunk. Like they said in the last chapter, was this little Pandora's box of Priscilla's life, and it was just literally hiding in that closet until Priscilla found it. A different Priscilla emerged after finding out her mother had lied to her. While she had long been a flirt, casually interested in the handsome boys 2 or 3 grades ahead of her, Priscilla got to messing around with an older crowd, recalled Cal White. She had the older boys going after her, and she started hanging around with them. Sonny Washington and Henry Smith, 2 sophomore heartthrobs, hotly pursued Priscilla, recounted Mary Ann Holstrom, a classmate, and everybody was just sort of gaga over her. Even when she was 13 years old, because of the way she looked, she knew what she had. And in earlier episodes, I talk about how the author of Child Bride, Suzanne Finstad, literally interviewed 300 people for this book. And she went back. I mean, she's talking to elementary school classmates and middle school and, junior high and high school classmates. She goes really, really far back. I mean, she's talking to everybody who knew Priscilla. So these are all these people who knew Priscilla when she was 13 years old, recounting all of this stuff. It's crazy. And that's going to prove very interesting when we now segue a little bit deeper into the myth that Priscilla has crafted, or alleged myth that she has crafted, about how strict her parents were. And she talks about that in Elvis and Me, how strict her parents were and how upset they were when she met Elvis and started going to see him and spend so much time with him. They were aghast, according to Priscilla. They were very strict. They didn't want her having anything to do with him. She was 14, he was 24. So these classmates and everyone that knew Priscilla back in the day are talking about that. So the book continues. It says, unlike the fictionalized version of her life that Priscilla would later create, Paul Beaulieu was not a caricature of the strict military father, nor were her parents overprotective. She could date more than the rest of us, recalled Carol Ann. The rules and regulations at her home were fairly lenient for Air Force parents. And when we went to base movies with a boy, we were chaperoned, but Priscilla was not chaperoned that much. That fall, Priscilla became more daring. Henry Smith, the star of the high school football team, wanted to ask her to the homecoming dance, but it was kind of frowned upon by the school administration for a junior high kid to go with a high school boy, recalled Christine Laws. Henry felt it was Anne Beaulieu who pushed for Priscilla to really go, and because she enjoyed the fact that her daughter was so sought after, and in the words of her cousin Margaret, because Priscilla reminded Anne of Jim. Jim meaning Priscilla's birth father. She was a little girl, but geez, she looked so mature, recalled Henry. Priscilla wore a long, formal, low-cut dress to the dance. The date that scandalized Del Val High was actually very tame. Henry drove to her house, and Paul Beaulieu chaperoned the couple to the dance. Henry was a perfect gentleman. At evening's end, him and Priscilla did no more than kiss. She was too young. She was just a kid. And I was a really nice guy. The relationship did not last much beyond the homecoming dance, though I would just maybe kiss her in the halls, remembered Henry, who found Priscilla very receptive. We liked each other, but she was just too young to really feel like she was going to be getting serious with anybody. I could tell that. He could also tell, Henry said later, that beneath her dutiful facade, Priscilla was chafing at the bit. When the relationship with Henry cooled, Priscilla moved on to more notorious older boys. She hung around with some guys who weren't in our crowd at all, recalled Carol Ann. These were guys who were in school, but barely. They just sort of hung out around the corner of the school. They had cars and drank beer. She rode around with those guys. Her close friends, Carol included, were baffled. All of a sudden, her personality just changed tremendously. She hung around the locker with these really hoodie boys, and you could tell that she didn't care about them, but you really wondered about her. I don't know if something at home had caused her to rebel or what. Something had happened at home. Priscilla had found her missing childhood, her true self, and she had been pressured into denying that reality. Keeping the pack with her mother, she found, was a big responsibility, too big for a 13-year-old child. She was also, classmates noticed, maturing faster physically than the other 8th grade girls. Moreover, Priscilla was an instinctively sexual creature. By the middle of 8th grade, Priscilla's reputation at school was suffering. She hung around with these guys who were not well liked and were the kind that would be promiscuous, said Carol Ann. She was beginning to get a poor reputation. What transpired between Priscilla and those older boys is not known, but it is clear from her class pictures that Priscilla had matured a sexual light year between 12 and 13. She was bolder, more assertive. She had a lot of confidence, said Evangeline. Mary Ann Holstrom, whose family moved to Austin that year, formed the impression that Priscilla Beaulieu was a person who was used to getting what she wanted, a very exciting-looking person who got a reaction wherever she went. Mary Ann considered Priscilla aloof, preoccupied with her looks. One day I pushed her into the pool. She was fixing her hair and it got all wet. She never spoke to me again. Her hair was a big point with her. The Del Val Junior High newspaper popularity poll voted her most beautiful, prettiest eyes, best dressed, best all around, prettiest hair, and class couple with Chuck Burns. Diane Edenbow, one of Priscilla's closer friends in 8th grade, claimed that strangers in downtown Austin would stop her on the street and ask if she was Pricilla Beaulieu. That's actually kind of quaint and sweet, 1950s. In Austin, I guess it was a small enough community that a junior high girl is going to be, walking around on the streets, and I guess adults are going to stop her and be like, "Are you Pricilla Beaulieu?" That's actually kind of funny. The second great blow of Priscilla's adolescence came late that spring when Paul Beaulieu informed the family that he was being transferred to the U.S. Air Force Base in Wiesbaden, Germany. "I was devastated," Priscilla recalled. The moving overseas seemed like the end of Priscilla's life. She turned 14 the day after graduating from junior high on May 23, 1959, a bittersweet experience for Priscilla as she reluctantly prepared to move to Germany. She later confided, "Even though I wanted to stay, this force was pulling me to go. It's unexplainable. Sometimes when I talk about it, I can still feel the pull of wanting to go." 7 months before Captain Beaulieu received his orders to report to Wiesbaden, Private Presley was shipped to Friedberg, then Bad Nauheim, Germany, just an hour's drive from the Air Force Base where Priscilla's father would soon be stationed. Priscilla and her friend Evangeline, an Elvis fanatic, looked up the two cities on a map of Germany that May, calculating the distance between them. "I think she was excited," said Evangeline, "but we all kidded her that she was going to Germany and she was going to meet Elvis Presley," confirmed Charlie Clements, Priscilla's across-the-street chum. Chuck Burns, who was holding hands with Priscilla during Saturday matinees that fall, dismissed it all as girl talk, just as Pam did not take seriously their childhood games of Imagine If. Diane Edenbow gave Priscilla a farewell party in June. No one knew then that it would be Priscilla's farewell at 14 to her childhood. The Beaulieus, minus Paul, flew to Connecticut to say goodbye to the Iversons and the Beaulieus. Priscilla palled around with her 15-year-old cousin, Margaret Ann. Priscilla told her cousin that she wanted to meet Elvis. And once Pricilla Beaulieu had set a goal, nothing would stand in her way. So that is the end of chapter 7. In the next chapter, chapter 8, it's going to be called The Myth Unravels. And we're also going to be moving into part 2 of the book. And part 2 is described, it says, Priscilla meets Elvis, legend or lies. So part 1 was all about Priscilla's very early story. And now we're going to be moving into part 2, which is the subject of the Priscilla Elvis lore, their fateful meeting, how their relationship developed during their time in Germany. And then, obviously Elvis goes back to the States, Priscilla is left behind, how the relationship developed, how it moved forward, all of that. But what do you guys think of this chapter? What do you guys think about Priscilla's personality changing drastically in the eyes of her girlfriends, how she started running with a more dangerous, fast crowd? I still attest that that is just all directly related to the psychological trauma that she suffered, your parents not telling her the truth about who she was and where she came from. That can have just devastating trickle-down effects in a child's mind, especially when her mother is begging her, pleading her to not tell her other half siblings or her stepfather that she knows about, the identity of who her real father is. And I think it just manifested, and she's acting out in all of these ways where she's trying to go out and try to find and forge her identity in the world. And, sadly, if what all of her childhood friends are saying, it just, wasn't good. She was just running in with a bad crowd, possibly being promiscuous at a very, very young age, which is just obviously not good for anyone, let alone a 13-year-old child. So all very, very sad, tragic details of Priscilla's early adolescence. But yeah, so next one, we're going to be going into part 2 of the book, chapter 8. I look forward to spending that time with you guys. Thank you for spending this time with me. Like the video, share the video, get into the playlist if you haven't started from the beginning. I would love it. This is a very, very interesting book, fascinating character study. I'm loving spending this time with you guys. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you very, very soon and see you on the next one. Bye.